What if I told you that most tantrums have nothing to do with misbehavior and everything to do with brain development? And what if that explosion, that emotional explosion came out of nowhere, actually started building hours earlier, silently, inside your child's nervous system? I know that this is a common challenge many parents encounter universally, so let's talk about what is really happening. Hi everyone, my name is Lux Hettiyadura and I'm a parenting and child development specialist with nearly 2 decades of experience now, and also I'm the creator of the world's first ICF accredited coach education specialization encompassing child adolescent development and parenting. And in this series, Beneath the Behavior in a Nutshell, we explore what is really happening beneath children's behavior through the lens of developmental science, attachment, and the nervous system, so we can stop reacting to behavior and start responding with understanding. Today, we are talking about tantrums that seem to come out of nowhere and why they actually don't. Imagine you are in the middle of a completely ordinary moment. Nothing's unusual, nothing's obviously wrong, and your child was fine and calm a minute ago. All of a sudden, there are tears, shouting, a body collapsing to the floor, or even an emotional explosion that makes no sense at all. So almost instinctively, the questions come up. Where did that come from? What just happened? So if you're a parent or a professional, you have likely stood in that moment, confused, or even doubting yourself, asking, what did I do wrong? And you will realize often in those moments, you are not really looking for strategy or quick fix. You are looking for explanation that actually make sense, because tantrums don't come out of nowhere, although they look like it. They come from somewhere very specific, from our nervous system, the developing brain, and the quiet accumulation of stress that children carry long before it becomes visible. So let's understand what is really happening this behavior. Before we go any further, I think it's important that we name this clearly. Tantrums are not misbehavior. With my experience nearly 2 decades now, I have seen that this is one of the most damaging misunderstandings in childhood, the idea that tantrums signal a difficult child or ineffective parenting. And I also have seen how parents are harshly judged and criticized for their children's tantrums, and as a result, they experience a lot of fear, guilt, and shame, which is unfortunate. So let's understand this clearly. A tantrum is not a choice. It's not manipulation, and it's definitely not lack of discipline. A tantrum is a neurobiological stress response. So when a child is tantruming, it means their nervous system has moved out of regulation into survival mode. And in survival mode, our brain is not concerned about manners, logic, or consequences. It's focused on just one thing only, which is safety. And this is why understanding this difference is essential, because once we mislabel survival as misbehavior, we begin responding in ways that unintentionally make the situation even worse. So what is actually happening in the brain? To understand tantrums, it's important that we understand how the brain works when things are going well and what happens when they don't. So, when a child is regulated, 3 major brain systems work together. The first one is the brain stem, which is responsible for our survival and stress responses. Number 2 is the limbic system, which process emotions and threat. Number 3 is the prefrontal cortex, which supports reasoning, impulse control, and communication. So in an actual tantrum, this integration doesn't disappear randomly. In fact, it breaks down in a very specific, predictable sequence. So the first thing to understand is that stress in children often builds long before we can ever see it. And also, children experience stress differently to adults, and this is why what feels manageable to us can feel way more overwhelming to a developing nervous system. So stress can be accumulated through things like sensory overload, like noise, lights, crowds, and clothing, social efforts and expectations, having to hold their emotions all day together, emotional restraints, transitions, uncertainty, hunger, thirst, or fatigue, and so on. And here is something very important that we must remember. Children can look regulated while their nervous system is already overloaded. So calm on the outside doesn't always mean calm on the inside. So once that internal stress crosses a threshold, the limbic system, our emotional brain, especially the amygdala, detects danger, and this happens instantly before any logic or any language. So the body shifts into our stress responses like fight, flight, and freeze, and at this point the reaction is no longer voluntary. The nervous system has taken over and the thinking brain has stepped aside. Meaning, as survival responses activate, the prefrontal cortex temporarily goes offline. And this is why during a tantrum, you may notice that reasoning doesn't work. Language feels unavailable, and you know that instructions are obviously ignored. And you will also see that consequences often increase the distress. Now, if we take a step back, do you really see how your child is not refusing to cooperate? They are just unable to. So, why does it feel like it came out of nowhere? The reason why we are addressing this is because this is often the moment that adults feel most confused, because the trigger looks small, like a cup, a cracker, a shoelace, or it could even be just a simple word. So what we need to understand is that this invisible trigger is rarely the actual cause, and those moments are just the last straw. So like we said before, the real invisible reasons that contribute to this behavior could be a long day of self-control, emotional suppression, overstimulation, nervous system fatigue, or it can also be unmet physical or emotional needs. Here is another important point for us to remember. As children grow, tantrums change how they look, but not why they happen. So if we look at toddlers, they lack self-regulation and language, and this is why they heavily rely on adults for regulation. On the other hand, preschool and early school age children face growing social and behavioral expectations and often experiencing emotional exhaustion after structured environments. You can imagine that, right? And then school age children frequently have to mask stress all day, so they melt down where they feel safest, which is at home. And if you look at adolescents, this is a very different story for adolescents. So they may express overload through withdrawal, sarcasm, or even shut down. However, it's important to remember that this is still driven by nervous system overwhelm, not attitude. So as you can see now, these are different expressions but driven by the same underlying biology. This is where co-regulation comes in. Think about it. Children are not born knowing how to regulate their emotions. They don't even have the words for it. So they learn, regulate emotions through relationships. When a calm, attuned adult nervous system helps a child's nervous system return to balance, we call it co-regulation. And this is just how the brain develops the capacity for regulation, and over time, repeated co-regulation becomes self-regulation. When a child is dysregulated, the goal is not to control behavior. The goal is to restore nervous system safety. So let's understand what often escalate tantrums. Things like lecturing or explaining in the moment, threats or punishments, asking questions, demanding eye contact or apologies, telling a child to calm down. I mean, think about it. Have you ever calmed down just because someone told you to do so? You know the answer, right? So it's the same thing for a child as well. And these require a thinking brain that is currently offline. And this is what I said earlier. Your child is not refusing to cooperate. They are just unable to. Does it make more sense now? So as we talk about what can escalate the situation, let's also understand what could help instead. So the first thing first, a grounded, regulated adult. For the sake of example, this could be you. And also using fewer words and slower speech. Predictable presence. You don't need to be doing anything, just your presence is enough. You will be surprised. And physical closeness, of course, if welcomed, like a gentle touch or a hug, but notice the keyword, only if welcomed. Also, as we all agree, that it also requires time and emotional safety. So once regulation returns, learning becomes possible again. As we are nearly coming to the conclusion of this conversation, let's focus on the bigger picture. The long-term goal is not to stop tantrums, it's reducing chronic nervous system overload. That means predictable routines, adequate sleep and nutrition, emotional expression, sensory regulation, secure relationships, and most importantly, adults caring for their own nervous systems. And when the system feels safer overall, tantrums naturally decreases, not because they are suppressed, but because they are no longer needed. So if you are open to reflections, I invite you to consider, instead of asking, why is my child behaving like this? Try asking, what might their nervous system is trying to communicate right now? You will see that this shift changes everything. You will start to see that tantrums are not a parenting failure, and they are also not the child's problem. They are just simply signals from a developing nervous system navigating a world that often overwhelms them. And when adults understand the science, we stop reacting to behavior and start responding to needs. And that's where real developmental support begins. Thank you for joining me today, intentionally understanding why children behave the way they do. And if this episode resonated with you, Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel as it helps us bring science-based, trauma-informed parenting and child development support to more families and professionals out there. And also, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Take care.